It's a very big, important day, a lot going on. We want to talk about DoITT and so forth, and maybe put that in a larger context as well. But welcome very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program Paul Cosgrave, and he's the commissioner within the mayor's office for the office DoITT, the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, right. A major part of the operation of the city of New York with great implications for all of us. And Paul Cosgrave, welcome very much to Conversation.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
My pleasure to talk to you. I've read a little bit of your resume, but we're going to fill it out a little. If you would, please, maybe share with us a little bit. I understand you're originally a New Yorker, where you were born and raised, some of your education, some of your background, and then we can talk about telecommunications issues as they relate to the city of New York, and also cybernetic developments that I know you've got some interest in as well. But could you share your own background,
Sure.
born and raised, that sort of thing,
Sure.
please?
I was born in Flushing, Queens, Flushing Hospital, back when we only had black and white TV.
I remember it well, yes.
And family quickly moved out to the island. We grew up out there in the middle of Nassau County, and ended up going to school upstate New York. Got my bachelor's and my master's in industrial engineering from Rensselaer.
At Rensselaer is at Troy, is that
Troy,
right?
New York.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And those were interesting days because back then computers were just really starting to work their way into college, believe it or not.
Right.
And
what year are we talking? You were at Troy as an undergrad?
I got my bachelor's in 72.
72.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that makes me more than a half decade old here. So
well, it is a time of tumultuous change since 72 to now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you were interested in those things. Were you interested in computers as you went right in at the undergraduate even level?
You know,
and
it's
so forth?
Interesting
because it was a burgeoning field.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There was not in those days. There was not a computer science program like you have today.
Right.
But I was very fortunate. When I was 16 years old, I got involved with a Boy Scout Explorer troop that was sponsored out on the island by IBM, and we got to work with some of their computers late at night when everybody else went home. And
you just an elder teenager.
Yeah, I was just as a kid in high school.
Right.
So that's when I first got interested, and went up to college and wanted to originally be an aerospace engineer.
Okay.
And that was in 1968 when I first went up there. And as you may know, you probably recall as well, in 1969, after we landed the man on the moon, all the money disappeared for aerospace. Totally.
Is that true?
Totally.
Right after Saturn?
Absolutely. There was a complete fall off in that industry right after we put the first flight up there on the moon.
Yeah.
And
I didn't realize there was such a
it was
quick
very
erosion.
So I started looking for other engineering programs, and I tried civil engineering for a while, and frankly, I wasn't me. And so then I realized that probably the best way to utilize the computers back then was really industrial engineering, and so I got involved on the industrial side.
Share us what industrial is. That where do we get into time and study things and all that?
Traditionally,
Taylor, somebody named Taylor.
Absolutely. Traditionally, that is exactly what everyone thinks of industrial engineering. But it really was a way to start using the computer to start running businesses more efficiently. And so the early stages of things like just what today is called enterprise resource planning, using computers to really run logistics for companies, and all that started back then in those days.
It was starting.
And we did a lot of computer modeling using operations research techniques to figure out how to run places more efficiently, trade off different variables and things like that. So that was how I got my interest.
And you were there. You were into that realm as early as '68 as an undergrad.
Yeah. And then I came out of school in '73 when I got my master's. Ended up joining what was then Arthur Anderson, which has now become Accenture.
Yeah.
I was on the consulting side. And that's now known as Accenture.
And you'd taken a degree in industrial engineering,
yes,
a master's?
Yes.
As well.
Yes, I did.
And it brought you this introduction to this cyber thing that's going to influence everything.
Exactly. And so at that time, the whole accounting profession was moving off of paper spreadsheets and into using computers, and so that's how we started. Excel didn't come around until the '80s.
Well, you see, that's my ignorance. I didn't know. You see, you know these things.
'70s was still punch cards. We were walking around with those punch cards, and You know, it reminds me of an interesting story. You recall back then, if the worst thing that could ever happen to you is if you ever dropped that deck of cards. You were in big trouble.
52 pickup. You said the game 52 pickup.
Exactly. You were in big trouble back then.
Yeah, right.
So I spent most of my early part of my career, actually the first 25 years in the private industry, doing consulting of one sort or another.
Consulting, outside and consulting.
Yeah, and the projects just kept getting bigger.
Troubleshooting in IT always for the big companies?
Mostly, longer term planning, not always troubleshooting, figuring out how to change things. Really using technology to change the way companies operate.
Technology,
get more efficient.
Cyber or computers, but technology in general. There's other aspects of extended consciousness other than cyber, but cyber is informing everything.
Yeah, this was more basic in those days. It was more just operating more efficiently, getting information from one agency or one department of a company over to another, using the computer to process things more efficiently that way. Or accounting, financial roll-ups. As these conglomerates were getting created, you know, they had a real challenge just keeping track of the finances of all their small companies. So using the technology to gather that information.
Yeah, and all the other possibilities that that thing was heralding, the Turing machines, and you were almost there at the birth and an effective thing of the computer entering the world in spades, as they would say. You were there almost at the birth of that.
Certainly in terms of the use of it from a business perspective, absolutely.
You were working on mainframes and that kind of thing?
Certainly worked on the early mainframes.
Yeah, they were great big machines. They had machines the size of this room, I think they would.
Yes, they did.
So you grew up with it, I mean, out of school and everything like that, and then you were consultants. Did you have your own company in consulting with the majors?
For the first few years, I worked with a large company there, what was known as Accenture, but I actually ended up getting involved in smaller companies in the 1990s and took one public. And that was interesting because we did that. We started that company right around 1990. It actually was started before I got there, but then I came aboard and really grew it. We focused on the internet because the internet really got started in business about 1995.
Okay.
So we were able to essentially work with Netscape.
Netscape,
as you recall,
remember
Netscape? They really started the whole push for the internet, and we became their technology partner and implemented the product they had, which was their e-commerce product, and that was the birth of e-commerce. Prior to 1995, there was no such thing like that.
And so you were giving them direction on how they might go.
Well,
with that?
we did is we installed their product in a lot of different accounts. So we were working with the customers, their end customers, to teach them how to use this because this was a new concept now, doing e-commerce. So we were able, right after Netscape, to take that company public, and I made a fair amount of money doing that.
Okay, good.
So in 1998, we sold that company, and I was thinking of working on my golf game the rest of my life. And
what's your handicap?
Not good these days.
I don't want to go into that then. Let's not go into that. Right? Yeah.
Not good these days.
Okay.
But that didn't. After 1 month and it didn't get any better, I decided I had to do something else. So I got a call from the government. Federal government called me and they wanted me to come and be the Chief Information Officer for the Internal Revenue Service.
My heavens, I can't believe something like that. You must have given that a little thought. What a challenge. What a challenge. Talk about a systems challenge.
In 1998, as you may recall, IRS was having a lot of problems. It was under a lot of scrutiny from the Congress. They had just actually passed an act that is now known as the Restructuring Act, the IRS Restructuring Act of 1998, and they essentially had to take the entire IRS and reconstitute it because what had happened was it became so focused on just collecting taxes and forgot that it was an agency that was supposed to be providing service to taxpayers. So we had to change the mission statement. We had to essentially reorient the whole organization to be one of really providing service.
Well, you had to be working with the whole Melgilla, as they say, the whole chairman and everything. You were IT.
I was the commissioner. I was not the commissioner. I worked right for the commissioner.
Right.
Charles Rosati. Charles Rosati, by the way, wrote a very interesting book about it called Many Unhappy Returns.
Many Unhappy Returns. Great title. A great double entendre.
And it's probably the most significant government transformation that took place because we took that agency. At the time, it was totally regional the way it ran. So you could go into an IRS call center, or you call a call center, let's say you'd go into one of their operations, their walk-in centers, and you might get a different answer if you walked in on the East Coast and you get a walk-in on the West Coast, which is not good.
That's a problem on a system scale.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we did was we really realized that technology had changed in such a great way, and the IRS hadn't taken advantage of it, that you could now start doing a lot of these things much more on a national basis. So we took 21 call centers that had been spread all around the country, and they were operating very regionally, and maybe only open from 9 to 5 in that time zone or something. So the services weren't very good. And most people couldn't get through because the lines were busy because they were just focused. So we made a national 800 number system. Anybody could call in, and then we rearranged everybody so that they'd take certain calls. So if you called, let's say you were a brand new taxpayer and you were doing a 1040 easy form, which is the simple one, you'd go to one person that might be fairly new and they'd handle that call. But if you were a business and you had some complicated business call, we'd route you to the people that handled that. So we basically changed the whole way of that worked.
And they hadn't done that.
No,
they hadn't had that in the past?
Everything was done geographically. And here's the interesting story. It was when these large federal agencies were created. Many of them were created in the 40s, 50s time frame. Telecom back then was pretty bad, if you recall. To make a long-distance call from California to New York, it cost a lot of money.
It was an event.
That's exactly right.
Lily Tomlin. Pushing it here.
Well, you remember. That's exactly right. So what happened that was very interesting is we realized that these structures that existed, these regional structures, were all based on that fact that you had to have management close by overseeing the people doing the work and all that, because you couldn't rely on any kind of communications.
Like you had to do those punch cards way back when
but now you have the communication, so set this up so you could operate this as a national entity.
You had a lot of switching systems came in that made possible
so
all kinds of...
we implemented all that. Prior to my arrival, there were 12 different data centers throughout the country, spread around. We didn't need 12 data centers. I consolidated down to 3. We could run that much more efficiently out of 3 centers. We didn't need 12. And we had 11 different email systems in the IRS. Each sort of area created its own email system.
Along what lines were they divided?
Just the geographic.
Geographical. Okay,
so each region sort of did their own email and everything. They couldn't talk to each other. The commissioner said to me, "I'd like to send an email to all my 100,000 employees," and I'm going, "Commissioner, I can't help you with that because we got 11 different email systems." He goes, "You know what? We're going to have one." And sure enough, within a couple months, we had one.
And what year were you doing that?
1998.
Okay, things were getting going then.
1998. Absolutely.
Right.
And I had the great fun of taking the IRS through Y2K. You probably remember Y2K.
Oh yes, I remember.
And so we got them through the Millennium Change, which was a huge program for the IRS because these systems were very old. The core system that was running the IRS at that time, and some of it's still in use. Most of it's been replaced, but some of it's still in use. Those programs, this is 2000 now. Those programs were written when John Kennedy was president.
Yeah, I know.
John Kennedy was president.
Really?
That's 40 years ago.
And the hardware was going so fast. Moore's Law and all of those kind of things. You're keeping track of all that as you were at that site, and things have been going.
We're running this ancient technology that's 40 years old. So most of that's been upgraded. We did that as part of that, but we had quite a challenge getting that going and moving it over. So
that training in industrial engineering would have helped you well to be thinking about systems.
Well,
it seems to me because you were doing a lot of different things and dealing with management.
Exactly. Yeah, it turns out the technology is not the complicated thing with systems. It's not the technology. It's the people. You've got to get people whenever you're doing change, like we did. We had 100,000 people that at the end of the day all had new jobs. Every single person in the IRS ended up having to come and try to get new jobs. We changed everything. We changed everything.
Okay. So, and you were able to keep them?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a very interesting aspect of technological development.
So the training part of that, the organizational development part of that, those are much harder parts of the whole program to work on than the technology.
But you don't think the problems are technological, they're human-centric?
Absolutely.
Okay, maybe spell it out a little bit.
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, let me bring it forward.
Let me bring
it forward. So I went back for a few years into the private sector. I wanted to go back to e-commerce world because e-commerce was really exciting. Unfortunately, by 2001, that market was starting to die a little bit.
It was indeed.
If you remember.
But you were entrepreneurially inclined?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Okay. I've done a lot of entrepreneurial.
And things were really booming in the before the .com bubble.
Exactly. And I got involved with a startup operation that was all about producing worldwide procurement process for the global construction industry.
Okay.
Had 4 of the largest construction companies in the world backing me, and we were doing this buying consortium for them.
Right.
But as I said, that was sort of the end of the e-commerce phase, and we got caught up with the internet bubble and all that, and that didn't phase out the way. So I ended up then coming back to the government as a consultant to. Now this was right after 9/11. I was over in Europe working with this consortium, and on 9/11, which obviously had a tremendous impact on everybody.
On everything, yeah.
And I got a call back from Secretary of Transportation, then Norm Mineta, to come back to the federal government and help them start up Transportation Security Administration. So I got involved in that early in 2002. Did some work with the Department of Transportation for a while there. And we got TSA started up, and then it transferred over to the
TSA?
Transportation Security Administration.
Okay, okay.
They're the folks at the airport now that check everybody to make sure they're
part of Homeland Security?
Now it's part of Homeland Security, but back then it was actually part of the Department of Transportation.
Yeah, right, okay.
So we got it started under Transportation, then we moved it over to Homeland Security. I then proceeded to get involved in a few other things, and the last thing I did in the federal government before I came to New York City here was with the FAA. Federal Aviation Administration, and what FAA is doing is they're trying to create a whole new way to run the national air transportation system. So they got this program called NextGen is the nickname for it now, Next Generation Air Transportation System, and it's all about changing the way the system of air traffic works today, because the system today is, well, you get all these nice modern planes flying around, the core technology that's controlling them is World War II vintage.
No fooling, really, yeah.
Well, you still got everything based on radar.
Right.
Radar is a World War II vintage technology.
Yeah, new at that time.
Yeah, it was new then, but it hadn't changed very much.
Okay,
and that's
really? Okay.
Whereas you got GPS technology today off of the satellites.
How about that? We have that now.
We don't use it.
How do we lay us on with new things we have to amortize the old systems that are outdated, we subsume them, we bring them into the new. How do we make a transformation from one system that's historically based and it's got all kinds of investment and so forth to a new one? Does it, Schumpeter used to talk about creative entrepreneurialism.
Sure.
How do we deal with that question as a systems way of thinking about our relationship to technology and the human condition?
Yeah, it's a very good question.
And we're coming up against that maybe now as you and I talk, because they're talking about coming up with a new agency to get the economics right down in Washington, which is a kind of big challenge. Maybe they need Cosgrave. No, but I'm just saying, maybe you address that question because you've dealt with it. IRS is a huge, you were dealing with a very large matter there.
Well, I'll go back to the FAA example.
Okay.
I can talk to that. The new agency that's going to solve all our economic problems.
You haven't got that down?
I don't know.
Maybe
the
we can work it out on an envelope right now.
Unfortunately, we get a lot of economic problems these days.
Right.
We're just trying to keep the economy going here in New York City. That's our biggest
I got
concern
you. That's
right
a
now,
pretty
as
big
you know.
economy in and of itself. National development. Yeah. But go back to the FAA.
So you've got today a system that's ground-based with all these radar systems, and that's the way they're tracking planes up in the air, right? And essentially you got air traffic controllers that are watching the big screen, seeing where the planes are and everything, and they got to figure out in their heads what's going on, because the computers really aren't giving them much information. All the computers are doing is telling them where those planes are. So they've got to calculate the speed of those planes, where they're headed, and to make sure they're not doing this. So they're very constrained. I mean, we were talking earlier about chess, right? I mean, you think about how computers much smarter than the human now in terms of chess games. Yeah. Same thing with this problem. I mean, why are these air traffic controllers having to do all these calculations in their head about the speed and velocity of planes and directions and all that?
Can't that be automated or made autonomic?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the plan we were working on was, one, computerize that whole process of tracking the trajectories of the planes and
with
everything.
redundancy.
With redundancy, absolutely. Yeah. Take the system itself off the ground. You don't need to have this be ground-based anymore. Have the whole system up in the air. Have the satellites tracking where all these planes are using the GPS technology.
We do have satellites now since Telstar, don't we?
We have the satellites, and guess what? The planes actually have the technology already in them to use this. But it really isn't used. It's still based on this radar system that's ground-based. And if you did that, you could then start having the pilots have as much information about what's going on around them as you got that air traffic controller chiller on the ground, and it'd get a lot more efficient.
Yeah.
So why don't we move to that? That was really your question.
It was, or how do we bring new technologies on?
And it's not an economics issue.
Yeah.
I mean, we've written off this whole equipment.
It's not economics, you say.
No,
it's not technology.
No, there's some dollar issues associated with this, but you've got to move the whole system, unfortunately, at the same time. So the main airlines have all converted to the new technology that's needed. The small pilots running the private air, they're going to be a little slower to convert. And there's an issue of how do we get them to put up the money they're going to have to put up to get the new technology in their planes. But fundamentally, there's no question that it's a more efficient way to run the airlines that way. And so it's got to move.
And you helped to move them along that path?
We built the whole structure of how it could work, how all those calculations I talked about earlier could be done, and how they could interface with the satellites, and how that all structured out.
And you were within the government when you were doing that?
I was actually doing that as a consultant to the government.
You were still consultant, so you're outside, coming back.
Yeah.
Do you like that idea of being outside the entity that you are consulting with, so you have a different kind of view, like an artist or a fish outside a fishbowl in which all the fish
now
are
I'm in the
swimming
government,
water?
okay? I'm in the government now. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the city, so I'm back on the other side.
But you were in the government when you were at IRS?
I was at the IRS as well,
But at FAA you were not?
No, FAA I was doing
Which
work
did you feel more comfortable in?
You know,
maybe it's not a fair question.
No, it's
you can
a fair
just go
question.
on something else.
It's a fair question.
But it's interesting for our intellectuals to know how to deal with large systems.
You have more independence as a consultant, and so therefore your thoughts and your recommendations can be more creative, perhaps. But certainly you don't have to worry about the city council testimony you got to give tomorrow or whatever that where you've got.
It's like a professor has to teach and can't do research.
You don't have to deal with the politics as much, to be honest. As the government person, you got to worry about all that. And you got to deal with that as well. But you have more of a picture, so you're not.
But that's still part of the decision-making process writ large.
Exactly.
If you were president, you got to deal with a lot of different levels, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So when you're on the government side, you have a lot more feel for all those aspects of it, and you take those into consideration.
Right.
You may not have as much independence, but as the consultant, you have a lot more independence. So it balances off, and that's why as government people we want to use the consultants because they'll give us some more independent ideas, and then they'll challenge us as to whether we're really thinking.
But the responsibility is there with the government.
At the end of the day, we make the decision. Oh, absolutely. At the end of the day, we've got to make the decisions.
Like you're also now within the government with Mr. Bloomberg.
Yes.
He selected you to be that. And what year did you come here?
I've been in the city now for 2.5 years. So
New York
is 2006.
New York is a far Ronald Coleman. Far better place now that Cosgrave be here. Right?
Well, let's say about Bloomberg. Let's put
Washington's loss is New York's gain, if I may say so. Because you're making things and having a responsibility for telecommunications in New York is a huge portfolio.
I cover a lot of different things.
It's
here
like
in the city.
A nation in a sense, New York City.
Yeah,
maybe you could lay out some of the dimensions.
We are the 4th largest government budget in this country.
Is that a fact?
You got the federal government, and then you got a couple of states, and then you got New York City.
Wow. Right.
So it's a $60 billion budget here in New York City, not for information technology, but for everything.
Yeah.
And there's a couple $1 billion a year that we're spending on technology. So I got to make sure that money's being spent.
Okay. And it's a very much of a financial capital of the world. It's a leading edge capital, artistic expression. And so you're bringing expertise in terms of utilizing the IT, information technology, to full advantage for the citizens of New York City. Huge responsibility, it seems to me.
Yes.
Are you having a good time?
I'm having a wonderful time.
There's a lot going on.
Yes, there
Can you fill us in on some of the major system changes that are going on that we all ought to be aware of from your perspective of that catbird seat?
Let me try to do that in the context really of the whole, if you will, what the mayor's trying to accomplish here, right?
Okay.
Because the mayor obviously brought a lot of technology knowledge to the city as well, so in any situation, I go back to the IRS situation or other. You've got to have a person at the top who understands what you're trying to do. So I'm very fortunate in having Mayor Bloomberg.
He's very savvy.
Who understands this as well as anybody. And when I was at the IRS, I had a similar type person working as the
was that Manette? Who was it?
Charles Rosati, who I told you about the book before.
Sorry.
So both of these gentlemen have a great perspective in terms of both the business and the technology. So working with them has been a pure pleasure, particularly with Mayor Bloomberg here.
Okay.
And so he had the vision when he first took office, it's 6.5 years ago now, almost 7 years, to essentially create an environment where the city became more customer service oriented, and people in the city became accountable for that, which was the same thing we did at the IRS. We had to make the IRS more customer service oriented, and we had to stand up and be accountable for that. So the mayor's idea was to create 311. Yeah. And I run 311 for him. That's one of the things I do.
That's a major development.
And we have moved that along. We've now handled 70 million calls since inception in 5.5 years.
That's what Ed Dirksen would call real money, or real calls.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's growing. It's growing all the time. We provide more service. We have over 3,000 services on 311. So you can call in on 3,000 different issues we'll handle, and from everything from potholes to somebody calling in because they're starving and they need to figure out how they can get a meal.
Right.
So it's quite a span of things we service. But the problem now, and this is a problem with a lot of the great things that we've been able to do in the administration, is the economy isn't working in our favor anymore. We had a good 6-7 years of a good financial run here in New York, and so we were able to make some investments and do things like 311, and I'll tell you about a few more of them that we've been very successful with. But now the economy's having some trouble, so we're going through some cutbacks in the city. So I'm now going to have to do more with less, and that's really going to be the theme of the last.
You're going to do more. You're going to have to do more.
I got to do more with less.
Well, that's the mark of good technology, because you can do more with less. Just think of the chip now that had 1,000. So the technology gives you a good lead in that direction.
Well,
but it's not exactly what people are in decision making want to hear.
But that's what you got to do.
Yeah. Okay.
And in this particular case, we had last year we had about a 15% increase in our call volume. So people are going to keep calling, and for a while that was fine because I was able to keep adding people to take the calls. But I can't do that anymore. So we have to move more and use technology smarter. So
we spoke earlier about how things can be automated. I guess they can be.
What we're doing with 311. The beauty of 311 is you only have to know one number.
That's right.
311. That's it. Before there were 14 pages of numbers in the phone book. 14 in small print, and you wouldn't necessarily know the right one to call because the mayor. It's a funny story with the mayor when he was on his initial campaign, he was driving around and he saw a bunch of garbage piled up next to a fire hydrant. So he was talking to his staff. He says, we need to do something about this. So let's call the Department of Sanitation to come pick up the garbage, and let's call the fire department to fix that fire hydrant. Somebody had to say to him, Mr. Mayor, you don't call the fire department to fix a fire hydrant. He goes, what do you mean? You call the Department of Environmental Protection. And so he goes, well, if I don't know that and I'm running for mayor, how's anybody going to know that?
How can we get good feedback?
Exactly.
And that is a large issue, particularly if you've got any respect for the idea of what we call democracy. It's good to have feedback from the people who make up the society as a principle.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Good.
And that's been another big part of 311 because a lot of calls we get are exactly that, that. Please come and send someone out to fix this pothole in front of my house, or fix this traffic light that isn't working, or a street light, whatever it might be. So that gave them the whole idea is creating 311, so people don't have to know which agency to call. And now the trick though is as we take that over the internet. We have to create that same structure, and while we've got fantastic information out on the internet, fortunately most of it today is organized by agencies. So I got to break that structure down and build it around services again. So someone has to be able to come on the internet and say, tell me how to fix a pothole or whatever. And the system will do that on the internet as well.
Well, if you've been able to figure out how to make the IRS work well and everything like that, you ought to be able to figure a simple thing like the New York City, all the problems in New York City and all the variegated
I tell you, the IRS was big. There were 100,000 employees in the IRS.
But New York's even a bigger job.
It was one thing. It was collecting taxes, right? Here we got a lot of different services we do.
I know.
A lot of different things.
One of the things we're interested in here, you're doing negotiating on the franchise agreements for cable television.
That is correct.
And we're here in public access, and people who are viewing would like to know, how does that all stand? What do you do? What is your role? Where does that all stand? Where is it going?
Sure.
Timetables, how does it look, and that kind of thing. Maybe you could talk about that.
Absolutely.
Because that's one of the hats you wear over there at DoITT.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as you stated, Harold, we oversee the cable franchise process for the city. Which is a complicated process because it's governed by federal law, FCC law, rules and regulations, and we're very restricted in what we can do and what we can't do. For example, we regulate cable television, but we don't regulate the programming. You're free to put any show on you want, or the people are carrying your show. We have no say in that at all. If they want to carry your show, they'll carry you. If they don't, we can't.
That's worked out in a different...
We can't get involved in that.
Yeah, right.
We don't get involved in prices. Basically, cable television can charge what they want to charge for the service. So those are things we can't do. But we can make sure that you have a good system, it's reliable, there's good service, that they build out. This is a very important thing. We have to make sure that they build out for the entire city, because we don't want them just going to the rich areas and not going to all the other areas. Yeah, they're not allowed to redline, absolutely. So we have to oversee that and make sure that happens. So here's the good news. We just completed a new deal with Verizon and Fios, and so for the first time now we're going to have real serious competition here in the city. And at the same time, have both Time Warner and Cablevision coming up for renewals here in the fall. We'll be working on that through the fall, and by the first early part of the next year, we'll have new franchise agreements in place for them as well.
And that's going to go out about 10 years or some set of template?
Slightly longer.
Slightly longer.
Yeah, we're still. That's part of the negotiation. And because we're in the middle of negotiation with them, I don't want to talk too much about the negotiations.
Okay, fine. Okay, yeah.
But you know, they've both been providing services now for quite some time here in New York. Originally, they were all, as we were talking earlier. Originally, there were a number of different companies. There were 9 different companies
that provided. Sterling, Manhattan, all these different.
And they've all collapsed now into the 2 primary companies, Time Warner and Cablevision. And we're
RCN.
Yes, and RCN too. I shouldn't forget RCN. RCN's in smaller places.
Yeah, I think they do buildings.
Yes.
Or something.
Yes. Whereas Time Warner and Cablevision
are the biggies.
So we want to make sure that we now have a truly competitive environment with all 4 of those in a very active environment. Yeah. And the reason for that is what we've seen elsewhere is that drives the price down. So this will be a benefit for the consumer. They'll now have a choice, and they'll get not only a lower price, I think, but a better service. And
among other things, you're going to be negotiating. You have we have this thing called PEG. It got started about 1970. I've been there from the beginning of cable access, and it got started about that. And you have public, educational, and governmental payback to the citizens by the cable companies for having that lucrative franchise granted to them. There's a lot of competition for that in the beginning. And the educational and the governmental sort of in a certain sense fit into the traditional dialectic, as it were, between the loci of power. Government, corporate, private, profit, government, tax, spend, regulate, dialectic. But there was a lot of input by civil society in a certain sense. In a special kind of context, 1970, we had people. And then they set this one across for the public. That's where we are now. We're public access. So that's something set aside for the people, which is pretty broad in definition, and it's pretty unique. I mean, I wonder if you've been able to think that through, how unique it is that there was something set aside for the people so that they could have multimedia production and distribution capability. Mr. Paley at CBS had no such responsibility to the folks. I don't think Mr. Gates at Microsoft has that. But cable television has this unique source of financing that makes it possible for this studio and about 3,000 like studios across the country in a unique financing way. And I wonder if maybe you could address that and if you understand that. And how does it look in your perception for the future of public access as a unique entity within the evolving social contract, as it were, and also within the technological capabilities that are evolving, particularly with the coming internet connections.
So let me talk a little bit about how that worked out during the negotiations with Verizon, because they've happened, and I can talk about them. Again, I don't want to go into the ones that are ongoing.
Don't want you to go anywhere you don't want to go.
But with Verizon, you know, we started out with that very issue, and it was our responsibility to negotiate a number of channels. So we wanted to make sure that for our own channels, I run the NYC TV, which is the government. So I run the government channels, and so we wanted to make sure that for the government and the educational channels, because we also work closely with CUNY on their channels, we wanted to make sure that we got more channel capabilities, because clearly as digital television's coming in, there's just a huge explosion in the number of available channels, as everyone knows.
And I think there's going to be more and more bandwidth all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's coming out of the labs. Yeah, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
So we wanted to make sure that we got our fair share of the growth. So we negotiated in total a large increase in number of channels that could be available to the whole gamut, the PEG gamut.
The PEG gamut, including public.
Including public. So,
see, that's us.
So we negotiated for yourselves more channels as well. And so you've got some additional channels.
In addition to the 4 or 3 we have now?
I believe so. I think
I don't
you're
want you have to go into detail.
Yeah, I think it's 5, but I'm not.
I think
quite
that's
sure
in keeping with what the future allows now. Increasingly, there's more capability with the bandwidth we could turn on. The future has a capability that we can begin to tap into that is really expansive and making expansion possible in a way that had been constrained in the past. So you've got that in the factoring in.
So we did that side of it, and then we worked with the borough president, with Scott, and we wanted to make sure that we set up an environment where you guys could then step in and negotiate the dollars. So you then came in and got the dollars for your channel from Verizon as well. So Verizon's going to be making a nice contribution to public access here in not only in Manhattan but in the 5 boroughs.
And that's set in place.
That was done. That deal's done.
That's done already. And they're going to be building out over the next 10 years, I guess, for the whole city.
They're going to build. Yeah,
and it's all fiber optic.
Yeah, they have a 6-year build out actually.
Okay.
So we want to see them be totally built out with fiber right to the home throughout the entire city, and it's a 6-year build out.
Okay. Yeah.
But as part of that, we made sure that you got some funding. So,
well, that's good.
So you got funding through that, and then as we go through the cable renewals, we'll get some additional funding
from the Time Warner and RCN, and that's coming up. That's going to be done this year, right?
We got an extension with the Public Service Commission, and we'll finish those negotiations in the early end of the winter. So it'll be probably in the February timeframe.
That'll finally be completed.
Yeah,
we'll
and then the new
stand.
renewals will be, and you'll know where you stand.
Okay, but over the years, so
it's an interesting process because at the end the commission that has to rule on the final deal. I do the negotiations. I put the deal together, but I got to bring it to what we call the FCRC, the Franchise Review Commission here, and on that commission, the borough presidents all sit. So you
had hearings in Brooklyn a while ago about the about Verizon.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we do. Yeah. So that's a very interesting process, and it takes some work, but. The net of it is we'll end up with renewals, and we're going to have a very good competitive process going.
We're going to have a good competitive process going for the public access. What is your thought? I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything, and you don't have to deal with it at all. We've got this thing, and I shared some stories with you. Been in public access for a long time. I remember Brian Lamb getting started with C-SPAN and all that sort of thing. The attitude of the people in the cable industry toward this thing called public access. What do you think the attitude is toward it? We got some problems where there's some states have gone to the state level to try to get around their obligation that has been accepted by and large since about 1970, that there's this responsibility for them to take something from their retained earnings otherwise and give to set up a thing like, say, public access. What's the attitude in general you find among the leaders of the cable industry toward public access, and could we do some public relations in there to realize that it's something that might be very well accepted by the general public, and there's probably a great deal of support for the idea of having something for the people being able to communicate rather than just the pros?
We never really had a problem in the negotiations on this. I'll be very honest. I think I'll speak to Verizon, but history shows that Cablevision and Time Warner have both been very, very generous as well. So. I think there's a very good understanding on the part of the cable industry that this is important. And a lot of it goes back to the start of, like you mentioned, C-SPAN. I mean, that was the cable industry that put C-SPAN together.
They put it together, and if I'm not mistaken, we've talked to a lot of people. Richard Wiley was a major figure down there in Washington, and Ted Turner and Rob Whistler, and a lot of those people at the Cable Television Association meetings we went to early in the 70s, they liked the idea of public access. They certainly liked the idea of C-SPAN. Sure. They think of it as their jewel in the crown. Now, there's some people who would like to put on another shopping channel or something, or they have a business thing or something. Yeah. But the industry as a whole, I think that they, it's my impression that they might very well be as they're proud of C-SPAN, they might very well begin to start developing a sense of pride in the existence of this thing unique called public access television. Seems to me it could be something just for only PR purposes could be very beneficial to them. I don't know, maybe it's not in your bed. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, and I
and that there's
that.
a wide public support for this idea of democracy that may be in the air politically.
Absolutely.
You know?
There's no question about that. There's no question about that. I think we're at a point here where the media can play a much greater role in terms of public democracy and not just not just the one-sided opinions that you get on a lot of these talk shows. Unfortunately, I think there is generally a view. I mean, we do it with our channels. I mean, I run 5 channels for the city of New York.
There are that many?
Yeah.
Are they really?
Well, we run our version of C-SPAN, the local channels that essentially cover the council meetings and some of the press conferences and things like that the mayor does. But we have another channel, the one actually our must-carry channel, Channel 25 here in New York, that has been named sort of a combination of C-SPAN and MTV.
Boy, that's a combo.
And so what we've done is we've taken it and made it a promotional channel for New York City.
Okay.
So we do a lot of shows, and some of them are fairly well known. Secrets of New York is one of our top show.
Okay.
That promotes the city, and we've been franchising this out. You'll start seeing you do see it already on a number of the airlines run these shows for us, and we're going to be franchising it. We've been franchising with PBS, but we're going to be franchising it internationally as well. So it's a great part of our promotion of New York City to the rest of the world.
Very good. You must work with other agencies within the borough, I don't want to say Chamber of Commerce, but agencies within the city is letting people know about New York City.
NYC Marketing Company is our Chamber of Commerce here in New York, and that's who we do work with.
And that's being done under the PEG thing, a governmental use of the channels.
Yeah.
What about the educational side? How are they going? We'll get back to public in a minute, public access.
But
the universities and so forth, they've got people that are of great importance and so forth. The educational development of television, now that we're having we said there's going to be more bandwidth, there's going to be more capability. Some of the educational institutions might be able to link up in a better way of in a communication way with the citizenry in an educational vision or mission that they have than perhaps they have.
No question
the
about that.
The universities and so forth, and the professors.
Well, you know
what I'm saying.
CUNY has a channel.
Or just as a societal plus.
Yes.
For education in the sense of using some of our best minds. Or
one idea we have is we're working with some of the not-for-profit channels out there today on how we could use TV to work with people where English isn't their first language. So
that's a big subject.
Yeah. So we're working with one of the Spanish stations on this and trying to create more interest in helping people learn English if it's not their first language. So that's a great service. I think.
That would be educating. I was thinking of Columbia, New York University. We have these great educating New School, this kind of stuff. They could be using these things. School system could use it more. Telecommunications, that kind of thing. For your thing, that's really good. I think we have 192 countries in the UN, and there's sizable communities of 189 of them in New York City. So we've got everybody here. There's a lot of room and need for having translation capability and that kind of stuff that's going on. Now back to the public access. Then, do you see? Are you keeping track, or do you need to, or is it? You've got a lot of things you have to be paying attention to. I understand and everything, but the public access system as an institution nationally, we have about 2,000-3,000 of these across the country. They have this unique system of financing that makes it possible for the citizen to come here, produce a program, and not have it be a business. They don't have to make a nut in order to make a program. They can make it available. That's a unique thing. And there's about 3,000 across the country. Do you keep track of that very much, or the significance of public access?
Only really here within the city. I'm familiar, of course, with your channel. I'm familiar with the Brooklyn channel and Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx channels. So
yeah,
we work with the channels here in the city.
And that's your responsibility. But it does exist at a national scale. It's beginning to reach out. What do you see the connection between, we would say public access. We're interested in that here. But public access and the emerging internet and the YouTube and the things that are going on in the broader world society in terms of some of the issues of communication?
Well, it's actually a very interesting issue from a number of different perspectives. Clearly, there's a movement of a lot of television here to more of a video-on-demand type service. People want to watch what they want to watch when they want to watch it, not when it's necessarily being broadcast.
If I may, Paul, that's industrial. You're looking at things in the systems way from the beginning of your. You've been looking at those kind of issues.
Yes, we have.
And that's a large one that's confronting the whole human family now. Yeah.
So we with our channel, our main channel, Channel 25, there, NYC TV, we've taken that channel and created a video-on-demand version of it that's accessible over the internet now.
Okay,
so people can come in via our main webpage, nyc.gov, and essentially access on NYC TV's pages previous shows and look at them on TV, on the internet. So
there's going to be a lot of that in the future.
So one of the things I think we've created, hopefully here, is an environment where the public access can do the same thing.
That'd be good, wouldn't it? Yeah. It's like archiving, like YouTube. And again, there's going to be, you're tracking cyber. Do you have a chance to keep track of what's going on and coming out of the labs and what's coming and that sort of thing in terms of new cyber developments? We're exceeding Moore's law. Things are moving so quickly. And you try to build, back to that question again, how do we lay aside with history when we have institutions, they have to be given account, amortized in an economic sense and all that sort of thing. And then the new capabilities, we have a capability. Do you understand
that
problem?
Exactly.
You're dealing with those things. And are you optimistic in terms of society being able to move into new capability that hasn't been characteristics to make that transition that you helped them do at IRS and other places on a larger tableau?
I'll give you a good example of that. Something I was reading about recently. China has now actually surpassed the United States in terms of the number of internet accounts that people have.
Is that right?
Interesting fact.
Yeah,
but
that is.
the number of PCs in China is much less than it is.
What's that? A lot of PCs.
They're all doing it on cell phones. They're all doing it on cell phones.
It's all morphing to the cell phone.
So the cell phones in China have really become the main vehicle for people accessing the internet. It's really much more pronounced there than it is here in this country. So you got to think about that. I mean, you got to think about that as a general trend. And clearly, that whole mobility issue of how do you work with people when you have now a much more mobile environment. It's no longer at a desktop; it's moving around now. So what we've done here in the city for our workforce along these lines is we've created something that we call NICEWIN, New York City Wireless Network, and we've built out our own network here for the city, wireless network. So essentially, all our mobile workers, our policemen, our firemen, our ambulance drivers, they're all connected to us now. So as they drive around the city, they're able to communicate, and we're able to, in a high-speed broadband way now, send information to them that they never could get before. So a fire engine going out to a fire, we can be sending them down building plans, just as they're on their way to the fire.
You could do that, couldn't you?
And policemen, in their car, they're going to get pictures now of warrant shots of potential people that might be arresting or something. So in the past, they've had to go through this whole process of doing it by name. And is this John Smith? Well, there's a lot of John Smiths, right? So a picture solves that problem pretty nice.
Words.
Exactly. So getting those mug shots down to confirm that they've got the right person, that's a big. So all these technologies, with mobile technologies, we're able to do much more aggressively now. What people don't, everybody says to me, well, Wi-Fi is out there, so you should be able to do it with Wi-Fi. Well, Wi-Fi is not it's not a mobile technology. You need a mobile wireless network, and that's what we've built. So this whole idea of mobility is clearly the number one area that we need to focus on these days.
And that goes into the whole question of everything, the technological development that's coming.
So back to the Dick Tracy days with the
I can remember Dick Tracy. You had the wristwatch. You were talking to it. Everybody saw it. I remember the first time I was on a bus and I was driving coming up 8th Avenue, and somebody started talking out to themselves. And I thought, oh, there's another poor soul that's gone into schizophrenia. And she was talking on the cell phone.
Right,
now
exactly.
it's just a common occurrence. So there's a lot of... The technology can be a double-edged sword. It can be good, it can be bad.
Absolutely.
And there's a question, there's a lot of ethics involved in that sort of thing.
Yes.
This, again, I don't like to keep coming back to it, but this idea of having communications capability set aside for the people, that public access to cable television is unique. And I'm wondering if that is something. Are you in touch with people in San Francisco in your level of responsibility for that venue there? You're here in New York, they're there. As far as it relates to this issue, let me just bring it up since we're on a public access. As an institutional entity, this public access cable television networks that exist across the country, or people that are dealing with them.
Well, I'll tell you.
And how do they deal with it in other places, San Francisco, Los Angeles? Because I know we got 3,000.
I'll be very honest. On that issue, no. We're not. No, because I really am not the spokesman for public access in New York here, you know.
No.
And so, to be very honest, I'm not. Where I am working right now with my fellow people holding my job in San Francisco and other places is on a very critical issue right now. And this is one your readers, your viewers here should know about. And that is, you know, hopefully most of them are aware of this, but in February next year there isn't going to be any analog television broadcast anymore. And so as that happens, that space that analog television was being used is going to get freed up. And there's a lot of debate still going on about the availability of that for public safety. Okay. So I'm leading a charge right now, working with my fellow chief information officers around the country and the other large cities about trying to convince the FCC how we want that provided to us, because they've got this view in Washington about how they want to do it from a national perspective. It's not going to work.
What address it? What?
Because we need to have control locally, and how you build wireless systems to take advantage of the spectrum, is what it's called up there. In New York City, with our with our tall skyscrapers, and
like
it's very different than you're doing it out in the Great Plains. So one size doesn't fit all here, and we've been spending. I was down in Washington yesterday. We spent a lot of time with our folks, the folks down there at the FCC and stuff, trying to educate them on this issue, because what we need is a way to build these systems more from the bottom up, from the local areas, and then we'll interconnect ourselves. They're very concerned, and a lot of this came about after 9/11, that there wasn't good governmental communications using these technologies.
Tunnel vision. They couldn't talk to one another.
So they're very bureaucracy. Yeah, they want to encourage us from DC perspective to have more interoperability. So you know, we can talk with all our other counterparts around the country on radios and things of that sort. And we agree with that, but we just don't think building it from the top down is going to work. We need to build it from the bottom up. And so we're working as a coalition around the country on that issue. Next time I talk with that group, I'll ask them about the public access.
Well, it's something I think is important because it's a unique thing, and it's unique in the way it's financed.
Yes.
You've got something here for the people, which is unique to communications, it seems to me, and it's something worth taking attention to. And then also your idea of, you know, like they talk in cyber language, Norbert Wiener, who coined the term, he used to speak about information overload. You get information overload, it prevents patterns. So you're looking for patterns that you can get that are at another level, and where there's efficiencies and so forth can be realized. And I hear you saying you want it bottom up. I think there's a lot of people who want things bottom up, and that there's a thing, again, if there's something like democracy, where you're trying to level and make reasonably available to the people the ability to compete in terms of the creation and distribution of multimedia television, this is a unique model that exists that ought to be encouraged by people who are of a democratic inclination toward the society. Don't you think?
Agree 100%.
I thank you very much for having helped put the context together where there's going to be continued support for that. And I would hope that would continue, because I think it's an important development.
Absolutely.
Beyond that, if I could, there's a thing, the producers. Now, you got the producers, then you have the people who run these systems and so forth. Then you have the actual citizens or producers. And that's another thing, that you've got people that are, like, say I'm a producer, I'm not a member of the staff here or something like that. We're producers. We got producers. So that their interests are things that could be entered into the public dialogue through this avenue by which there can be, we're closest to the people. The producers are closest to the actual people that make up the society. So it's an important avenue for people to get information from what the people on the ground, the real honest-to-God people in the ground, are thinking and feeling. And that's something that's unique to most systems of communication that have been top down from central headquarters, putting a broadcast signal out for everybody to receive.
Sure.
This entry, and it also, if I may, it sort of morphs with the melds with in a pattern way with the morphing over to the cell phone universe that you cited from China and so forth. So democracy and getting word from the people is something we ought to, people in responsible positions for the society, ought to keep notice of.
Absolutely.
You do.
What you're talking about fits into this whole model that we've been considering a lot in government called Web 2.0, which or Government 2.0.
I've heard of it. I don't know.
Well, it's really all the social networking technologies and bringing them into government, and so we can get more democracy in terms of people talking.
Take advantage of the technological things that are coming out of the
It's interesting as you were talking about public access television. And the ability of people to just produce, from those that are interested in doing that, like yourself,
without it having to become a big business deal that they necessarily have to do.
But it's interesting. YouTube, of course, does that as well on a low-scale basis. You're doing it here on a much more professional basis.
Well, yeah, you're making
and so the quality of what you're doing is much higher.
Well, it would be, and it's also right direct to the people at the local area. And we've got 3,000 of these across the country. It's a pretty. We think it's important in access, but we happen to be there. But it is an opening to democracy, and it seems to me democracy may be in the air. And it's said, again, the unique way in which it was done, I don't think everything else is done within the loci of either corporate, profit, private sector, profit, government, tax and spend and regulate. That's the way everything's done. But this was something from the civil society.
Sure.
And I think we want to have voices from that civil society and avenues where they can contribute in a reasonably competitive way with the big players who have all that capital behind them helping them put those things together, But anyway, so I really thank you for coming in, busy schedule. And it's a pleasure talking to you and getting a background on all the work you've done. I really thank you very much for coming in.
Great.
Wish you all the very best as you proceed along. Having a good time. You like New York City.
I love it. I'm glad to be back in New York.
I've
traveled around a lot, and I'm glad I'm back here again.
Yeah, I don't know why Dorothy wanted to go back to Kansas. I'd want to go back to Manhattan if I had my druthers.
I just wish the Yankees were doing a little better. That'd be good.
The last games, the stadium, the last game's tomorrow night, huh?
Yeah,
are you going to go there for? Are you going to sing Auld Lang Syne?
I didn't get a ticket.
You didn't get the ticket. Couldn't get it on that one.
It's going to be a sad event, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, listen, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. We just got started talking. It was really a pleasure for you to have Paul Cosgrave. Then again, he's the commissioner within the mayor's office for the Office of Telecommunications and
Technology and Telecommunications.
Technology and Telecommunications, and he has responsibility among many others for helping negotiate the arrangement by which public access exists, for which we thank you and wish you all the best in that venue. Thank you for sharing that with us now. Tune in. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. That's it for now. Once again, Paul, thanks very, very much for coming in. My pleasure. It was really a pleasure. So we have to stay until they finish the credits and so forth.
Okay.
But so I believe in this public access, and I think it's really important. But one tends to think what they're doing is important.
Now, you've been doing public access. We were talking 20, 30 years ago.
Well, yeah.
You've been in public access the whole time?
Well, this program that you've just been a guest of is, I think, the longest one running in the country. I've been doing it since the beginning. I got the use of about the third, what they called them then in the old days, Portapac. And it was all coming out of Japan. It was a video machine where an individual could make television. And it was a big old thing in black and white, 20-minute black and white.
Wow.
But we went off with that and did programs through about 1969 or so. But the technology simply wasn't there before. And as I indicated to you all, it was black and white. You said black and white, but the color came later. But it was kinescope, and it was film. There was no television until Mr. Goldmark Sr. invented videotape, and we were off to the races.
That is amazing.
But now it's going quickly, and it's merging into the world of cyber. and it's a major source of optimism, perhaps.